Defending. The problem is, as always, one of expectation. I tell myself this again and again, breathing in a very controlled way. I've learned the connection between the breath and the rest of me. There's a kind of control one may exercise over the pumps that flank the inner chest, a control that spreads as if by magic to the realm of thinking. I'm sure that my thoughts must now, more than ever, be under my control. For a handful of years I've plugged away at a PhD. I've scribbled and argued and applied, even to the edges of my ability. The question, just what is a philosopher anyway, has consistently animated my thoughts. Even more than this, the question, who do you think you are, has left me riven. I'm not naive. I know a doctorate is just a piece of paper. I know plenty of folks have them, plenty of folks whose opinions I wouldn't touch with a 10-foot pole. I, nevertheless, still want the thing, the title of the piece of paper, and I want it to matter. I'd like to be different after it's done. I'm seated in my flat in Warsaw at my desk. The computer screen tells me a meeting will start at any moment, once I'm let in. My wife is in the room. She is dressed in a beautiful and professional way. It is March 28th, 2022, and the war on Ukraine is just over a month old. I'm sure that E isn't the first Ukrainian person I ever met, but he comes to mind as I sit, waiting to defend. E is slight, quick-eyed, and brilliant. He lives in Kiev, and at the time of this writing, he remains defiantly alive. We met when both in our mid-20s bloom, working on cruise ships as musicians. E was a classically trained pianist with intimidating jazz chops. He worked in the show band, sight-reading a variety of material every night. I was a lowly bass player in a dance band. My job was to stay awake during the Tennessee Waltz. I remember E had an extraordinary talent for pattern recognition. He could take in frighteningly complex musical passages at a glance. He was a brilliant amateur photographer. One Halloween, he painted his face in white and red bars and said he was Poland. That contract, we were working the Mediterranean Sea. On a particularly hazy night, E stumbled into a Venetian canal. There were 5 or 10 of us lost musicos with him, wandering through Venice as it slept. Rachel T. was the singer on that contract, and I remember she performed an aria impromptu under an ornate arch at around 2 a.m. But what does any of this have to do with the defense? I try to hold on to the words I'll need when the defense begins. I will talk about alterity, phenomenology, power relations. I tell my mind to run through a little bestiary of technical concepts. On my desk, I have coffee, yerba mate, and apple slices. I see a book by Camus I was going to read but didn't. I think about getting a glass of plain water but do not. I sit, and my wife touches my knee. Her family has taken in Ukrainian refugees. They are described as silent, energetic, and great lovers of bread. I think about the conversations my wife and I had about squeezing a family into our 2-room flat. I think about the nature of intention. In the last few weeks, symbols have multiplied, creative juxtapositions of yellow and blue, depictions of Zelensky with his resolute gaze. Warsaw has papered its public space with war associations. Only the dogs and crows think it's business as usual. Yet, even though the war is just across the border and the madman theory of statecraft is so vividly on display, we don't live in fear. People take walks and order vegan ramen. We complain about inflation and dabble in real estate. My neighbor, in the flat above, is teaching herself to sing, howling arpeggios with verve. For the briefest moment, we thought the war might swallow our lives. It's clear now that Warsaw will absorb it as yet another of its struggles, maintaining its momentum as it shuffles on and on. Where it gets the fortitude to do so, only history can tell. Yet the defense will not begin. The Zoom map is still nothing more than a blue square informing me that there might, one fine day, be a meeting. Strange, firework-like patches of itching bloom and recede at various points in my body. I do not attempt to scratch them. I refuse to give in. But it wasn't E who told me about Bulgakov, right? No, I think it was M. M is a violinist from Odessa who is at the time of this writing defiantly alive. We met on her first contract at sea when she was dating a Peruvian casino dealer with a limited attachment to the truth. I had a girlfriend back home at the time, so I represented a safe friend zone situation. We talked about toxic masculinity before it had a name. She was perfectly comfortable telling me all men were dogs. I suppose that was more than a decade ago. Now, we have Messenger, with its green dot. If the green dot is under someone's icon, they're online. If they're online, they're probably alive. I am one of those people that rail fecklessly against the power of social media. But I have to say the green dot has been something of a boon to my mental health over the past few weeks. I think of the wars in 1917 and 1940, the American mothers left home in the early 1860s, waiting. What a treasure the green dot might have been for them. Maybe it was B who told me about Bulgakov. She's married now, watching the war from afar, and I imagine it cuts her to pieces. B was what some of her friends called a nationalist, meaning even back in the early 2010s she spoke Ukrainian, not Russian, and she cared a great deal for her nation's colors. She once told me that she wasn't a natural first violinist because she made mistakes. She felt she was a second-chair violinist. I never understood deeply. For me, there was nothing second-class in her sound. A very long time ago, I wrote an immature essay on miracles and showed it to B. She gave few notes, but the notes she gave were useful. I'm absolutely certain it was one of the Ukrainian musicians from the old days that hipped me to Bulgakov's The Master and Margarita. But that's not the piece I'm thinking of now as the Zoom meeting refuses to begin. No. I'm thinking of the Fatal Eggs. My wife has a pen in her hand. On a piece of innocent paper she has written PhD Defense and my name. I feel gastrointestinal foreshadowings, disturbances, bubbling through my organism, tilting toward outright catastrophe. My sphincter is a python's clutch. My balls MIA. Suddenly, the Zoom meeting begins. As I join video and audio, I smell something strange, like burnt marshmallows. I see none of the professors and advisors I expect. Instead, a rather leonine visage stares back at me. He wears a maroon bow tie and custom monocle. I don't know how this machine works, he says in English. They told me you'd be able to see me. Who's they, I ask. He looks off camera for a moment, nodding to someone or something. You wanted to know I'm told something about my book. Who are the Fatal Eggs? The one about examinations. Who are you? I say. I'm waiting for my... The problem is usually the ending. Finding an ending. You're aware I had to change the ending of my book. I don't want to get distracted, I say. My first idea for the ending was to have the city of Moscow destroyed by a plague of giant snakes. You're aware of this? So you're Bulgakov, that's the idea? That's what my mind is doing to me right now. The Zoom ghost shrugs his shoulders and makes a face of ironic apology. He is not smiling, but his eyes are full of unmade jokes. I realize time has stopped. The electric hum of the hard drive is gone. The building is silent. My wife is frozen in place, pen in hand, mid-stroke. The main character of my novel is one Professor Persikov. You recall him? Bulgakov asks. Sure. He's the guy that discovers the ray that turns the reptiles into... No spoilers. The book is 103 years old. Nonetheless. You remember Persikov, the professor of zoology. I have a specific question for you related to the professor. Why does Persikov die in the book? I allow myself some thought time. When did I first read Fatal Eggs? 10 years ago? What was happening at that exact moment? Was I at the airport? No, I was on a plane, reading for escapism. I had argued with the ticket agent about missing my connecting flight. It was in September 2012. My father had just passed away. I remember the agent had a single patch of thick black hair in the center of his head, just where so many men miss it. Everywhere else, he was bald. He had on a dark uniform with a gold name tag. I cannot, through the haze of memory, read his name. His face was small, almost pinched, his nose like a knife. He seemed to have given up on the possibility of charm. A fink is what he was. I can't remember the words he used. I recall a general tendency to condescend. After some unpleasant questioning, I explained my misconnection by talking about going home to watch my father put in the ground. That shut the ticket agent up. Maybe it was on that plane ride that I first read about Professor Persikov. And why, again, Bulgakov says, does the good professor die? Because of the inefficiency of Soviet bureaucracy. The Postal Service switched the egg shipments. Again, spoilers. How do you expect me to? It's also the wrong answer. Bulgakov adjusts his bow tie. You're searching for plot elements, facts in the world of the story. That's not the kind of question I'm asking you. I'm asking you why. Meta why. Why from the vantage of the gods of the story. I don't know how the catastrophe at the country residence. It happens in the Smolensk region, right? I think so. Why? You needed a rural setting, I guess someplace far away. No. Think like a god. It's because all things reveal hidden repetition. I don't. Persikov gives examinations in the book. Don't you remember? I look over at my wife. She is locked in position, hunched over a piece of paper, 2/3 of a heart drawn on a page. The pen she holds is a Platinum 3776 with a 3-time music nib. It lays down a generous line and requires a certain amount of care. Her lips are pursed in happy concentration. Her eyes are little slits. I say, Persikov fails nearly all of the students who take examinations with him. This, my friend, is just right. Persikov persecutes everybody. He can't see others as they are, doesn't know what to do with anybody or anything unrelated to his precious zoological work. It's the people, not snakes, that end him. And, of course, his wife. He doesn't have a wife, I say. Quite right. Not by the end of the story. But he does at the beginning, doesn't he? I don't remember, I say. Maybe you should. I want to ask Bulgakov about the war now, about what it looks like to him. I want to ask him about repetition, about the old Marx line on tragedy and farce. I remember that Bulgakov started life in Kiev but ended it in Moscow. I want to ask him if he perhaps regretted heading east instead of west. I feel my ignorance like a heavy weight, dragging my shoulders into sad slopes. I, encountering the apparition of a literary icon, find nothing but emptiness to offer. Not the best of feelings, right before a defense. I say, do you know our time? Do our acts register in the place where spirits continue? Do you know about this war? The hardest thing about satire, Bulgakov responds, is standing firm before the menace of the gallows. Imagine if I'd ended my book in 1924 with a horde of giant snakes and other reptiles destroying the center of the Soviet Empire. Well, no one would have read it. But oh, what a book that would have been. Bulgakov looks over the camera and nods. The defense is set, the real defense, not my fantasy. Knowing what he's about to say, I listen politely. He says the connection will be broken soon, gives some advice on dodging tough questions. As time resumes, I hear the sound of my wife's pen completing her heart of ink. There are faces on my computer screen, some familiar, some strange. There are names under the faces, the names I know well. What are we going to talk about? My name is there, and my face. I look like someone older than me. I take a breath and try to bring to mind what I'm supposed to be defending.